out there winning reparations to African people. This is a great event. I just want to salute all of you who have come out here tonight in Boston to talk about the Day of Reparations to African people and this whole question of reparations. Could I start by asking how many people in this audience believe that white people owe reparations to African people? All right, that's very powerful. I'm very moved to hear that. So we're going to talk about that and, really recognize that a stand of reparations is a self-criticism from the white population to African people. And it isn't just words. It's returning the stolen resources into the hands of the African Revolution. And I want to, really explore that tonight, really understand it, and see what a positive and powerful project this is. So I want to start by saluting my leadership, Chairman Amalia Shatella, who is... I'm really excited that you're going to be able to hear him tonight and to be able to hear him, and the chairman's going to lay out so much about what the African People's Socialist Party and the African Revolution is about and doing and why we have to have this. And it's been an honor to work under the leadership of Chairman Amalia Shatella in the African People's Solidarity Committee for 42 years. Founded in 1976, a month ago, October of 1976, so we're just celebrating 42 years, and it's really a powerful experiment in terms of what to do about the white people, and we're going to talk about that. And I want to salute Deputy Chair Onizime Shatella, who we saw on the video, who is the leader, the coordinator of the Black Power Blueprint, among other things. She's also the coordinator of the entire economic front of the African People's Socialist Party, which is very vast. That includes furniture stores and Uhuru Foods and Pies and many other projects, and Zelle Consignment in Huntsville, Alabama, building the economic infrastructure of the African Revolution, which is very powerful and very unique. And of course, I want to salute Comrade Jesse, who's the leader of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and who does just an amazing job. And to say, what a powerful tour we've been on. We've been to St. Louis, we've been to St. Petersburg, Florida, Gainesville, Florida, Philadelphia, New York, here. I'm sure I'm missing some places, and then we're going to go to Seattle and Portland next week, so very excited about the West Coast leg of this tour as well. So when we talk about the question of reparations, we're talking about the most critical issue, the most critical question in the world, because every contradiction that we see, from these mass shooters to permanent warfare that we see, to all of the contradictions in the election and the existence of Trump and even Obama before him, and this crisis of imperialism, even the question of climate change, and this fact that they keep coming out with all of these studies saying, oh, we didn't realize this was all happening so quickly. We thought it was going to take to 2100, but now it might be to 2020, when the climate change is really going to kick in. All of these questions cannot be solved without dealing with the fundamental contradiction, the relationship of African people and oppressed people to this system of capitalism and world imperialism. This is the question that must be solved. And that's what we want to talk about. It's in everything. It's in everything that we see. So, just to be here in Boston, I want to say every place we go, every city has a particular relationship to imperialism. Of course, Boston, as you probably know, was the center of the trade, or the center of the slave ships here in Boston for the 17th and 18th century. And it's, sort of has this veneer of the abolitionist city But in fact, its wealth, just like every other city and town in the entire United States, Britain, and Europe, is built on the enslavement of African people, and that's where the wealth of genteel Boston comes from. And in fact, I was reading that. Do you say Faneuil Hall?
Faneuil Hall.
Faneuil Hall was the slave market, was the market where African people were bought and sold in this city, just as in New York, it was on Wall Street. So, these are things that we have to know. And we were in Alabama, we were in Huntsville, Alabama on part of this tour, and in that state, 300 African people were lynched in part of the terror that white people have perpetrated against the African population. But Boston has its own relationship to it, and how many Africans have been murdered, slaughtered, captured, and kidnapped based on what happened here in Boston and the state of Massachusetts. So it is something, as the chairman said, that built a world system, and the entirety of the United States is built on the question of the enslavement of African people and the genocide against the indigenous people and the theft of their land. And Chairman Omali Yeshitela tells us that without that, there would be no America. There would be no United States. Yeah. There couldn't be that, because it's essential to what the system is. And I think it's really important, because when we go to school or when we read about our history, we sort of get this idea that, it was so great, it was the land of opportunity, it was the place where workers and poor people came from Europe and were able to find a future, to walk up the ladder of success, and all of this myth. And then it, just has this, we had a few stains on our history, and that's the enslavement of African people and the genocide. But basically, it was all a good thing. But the reality is the other way around, that the enslavement of African people and the genocide and theft of the land of the indigenous people is America. That's what it is. It's in its DNA. So we can't go to, this thought that, all we have to do is go back to some former, kinder, gentler America, capitalism, or anything like that, because as we know, the founders of America were slave masters. Yeah. George Washington owned 300 African people. Thomas Jefferson, hundreds, including African children that he used as tiny children to be workers in his nail factory, to be enslaved workers as children in his nail factory, not to mention that he was the sexual predator that raped and enslaved Sally Hemings and had many children with her. And this is the person that is upheld as the analyst of democracy that we're supposed to look up to. So we know that this is the foundation of the system, and that, as the chairman tells us in his political understandings called African internationalism, we can be African internationalists, by the way, and I really want to urge you to become an African internationalist, because it lets us dispel all the myths that we are used to, our narrative. What the chairman calls us, we are the subjects of history, because we're the conquerors. So we tell the history. But the history of African people, indigenous people, are the objects of history under this system. There's no name. There's no Anne Frank of the indigenous Holocaust. There's no Anne Frank of the enslavement of African people and young people, young African women. There's nothing like that. The third person, there's statistics. And that what's happening now, as the chairman tells us, in the world, is that the voice of the oppressed is forcing itself into the agenda. Mm-hmm. It's resistance. It's fighting for the true history and for the ability of African people and oppressed people to have freedom, to have independence, to have control over their lives and destiny. And this is what is challenging this system and white power and creating this crisis of imperialism. And it's very important, because this narrative is changing, and the existence of the African People's Solidarity Committee allows us, as white people to begin to see this narrative as a lie and begin to see the world and embrace the worldview of the oppressed and colonized African working class. To see the world basically right side up. And that's very powerful and empowering even to us. So the chairman, always points out that Europe in the Middle Ages was poor, it was oppressed, it was under feudalism. White people had nothing, not even the clothes on their backs, generally speaking. And that what rescued Europe, in fact, by the way, that Europe was so poor that, as Chairman often points out, that when Christopher Columbus was trying to get money from Queen Isabella, she had to hawk her jewelry to get the money to fund him to come here. That began, the process of genocide against indigenous people. So Europe was poor. So how did it go from an impoverished, barren land to the wealthiest system of capitalism that the world has ever known? What happened? And I know that years ago, they used to have this comic book called, Capitalism and How It Started. And I always remember, in it would show pictures, drawings of shoemakers and hat makers and everything in Europe in the Middle Ages, tapping on the shoes, and then somehow getting richer and richer and richer. But if you have a business, it doesn't just go up incrementally. You have to have an investment. You have to have capital to start a business. Everybody knows that. So where did Europe get this capital? And the chairman will probably tell you more than I have time to go into today. But it's what Karl Marx called the primitive accumulation of capital, the first accumulation of capital, which is the assault on Africa, the enslavement of the indigenous people, and the forcing of them into the mines, like the silver mines in South America, and the Opium War against China, and colonialism all around the world. So in the 1400s, Europe came out of its caves, basically, and started sailing ships to Africa, stealing the gold, and beginning to assault the African population and civilizations, and kidnap African people, and turn African human beings into commodities for sale. A commodity is an item for sale. So the first real commodity of capitalism was African human beings. We have to see that. That's chilling. That's chilling. That's what Wall Street was founded on. And you look at Wall Street and they found the bodies, buried bodies of African people under the buildings of Wall Street. To me, that tells the story of America and capitalism right there. Because capitalism rests on the bodies of Africans. That tells the story right there. And, it was this that started the stock market of Amsterdam and what they call the City of London, the stock market of London. And the wealth all around the world. It started bringing gold and wealth into Europe and beginning the process of overturning feudalism and bringing in capitalism. So Chairman O'Malley's tale makes a really important point. That imperialism is not something that happened in a later stage of capitalism. Imperialism birthed capitalism because Europe came out to conquer Africa, to conquer the Americas, and to basically enslave and colonize the majority of humanity. And we can look at, what Europe did with the violence, the rape, the pillage, the forcing of African people, just violence that we don't even have words for, to express. This is what the assault on Africa represented, what the genocide against the indigenous people represented. Something that is inherent in everything that we do today, and that the ground of America, South America, and Europe is soaking in the blood of African oppressed people. And I also want to say that I've tried to study what European colonialism did also to the Philippines, to India, to Vietnam, to Southeast Asia. Everywhere you go, we could spend a whole night just talking about what Europeans did and do and still do, and created a system that is not just capitalism, it's parasitic capitalism, because it can only exist by sucking the blood of everybody else on the planet. So what it meant was, when white people came here from Europe, poor and oppressed, that the way we got up that ladder of success was to step on the backs of Africans, to pick up the gun against indigenous people, to pick up the gun against African people, to lynch them, to murder them, to rape, to wage mass terror. This is what we have to look at. Because everything that we have, even white workers, even white women, even white LGBT, even white disabled, all of us sit on this pedestal of the oppression of African people. There's two Americas. And as this African People's Socialist Party has told us, it's not racism that we're fighting. It's not racism that African people are fighting against. It's colonialism. It is a system backed up by state power, and we as white people have been that state when there wasn't the police and the military, when we came in. And there's so many stories about that. We wrote a book called Overturning the Culture of Violence that documents a lot of that history that we did. And it was overwhelming to write it. This is what we did, and this is what we have to acknowledge, because, we can say, we want victory for African people, or we want African liberation, so can't we just get along now? No, we can't. We have to tell the truth. We have to look at it. We have to own it, and we have to take responsibility for it. And we have to make self-criticism for that. So the African People's Solidarity Committee was formed by the African People's Socialist Party in 1976. And it's a very brilliant thing, because the African Revolution of the 1960s, the Black Power movement, was defeated by COINTELPRO, and the leaders were murdered and assassinated, like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, and so many others, including African people who are in prison today because of struggle in that period, including Assata Shakur. So many African people still see the results of that. And the U.S. government defeated that movement. It waged a counterinsurgency against the African Revolution. And it included, as the chairman says, flooding African communities with drugs and a drug economy after wiping out the economy that existed in African communities all over this country. They called it urban renewal and all kinds of other things. They wiped out these communities. They took away when African people had their own schools, and they had gas stations, and they had beauty shops, and they had things. That doesn't exist now. It doesn't exist now. The only thing that was left was a drug economy to put food on the table, and the U.S. began building massive prisons, so that now the U.S. has the highest prison population in the entire planet, 2.3 million people in prison, half of whom are African, and this is greater than, by way far, than China, that has 1 billion people. China has something like 150,000 people in prison, and they always say, China has human rights violations. No, the Gulag is here. The Gulag is in this country, and it is part of the colonial domination and terror against African people that we have united with. So Chairman Omali Yeshitela set about figuring out, what happened? How did African people lose the struggle, get defeated? And it began summing up and solving all the problems to make sure that the next time around, African people were going to win. And that means African people as one people all around the world taking back their land, their continent, Africa, and all the stolen resources, and everybody gets out. Everybody gets out, because African workers are going to have power over their that. That's a future that I want to see, and I think you do too. And so the chairman formed, the African People's Socialist Party formed the African People's Solidarity Committee. And this is a brilliant strategy because what it does is it places an organization of the African Revolution into the middle of the white population to extend the African Revolution into the white population. And I don't know if you ever saw the film on Algeria. What's the name of it? Battle of Algiers. Yeah. Battle of Algiers. But there's a place in there when the Arab people of Algeria who were fighting a revolution against French colonialism, the Arab women have to take off their veil, cut their hair, and dress in European style, and go into the white community to do certain things, and pass through the checkpoints. Well, that's not necessary now, because the African People's Socialist Party created the African People's Solidarity Committee. So we are here. And revolution is a mass question. It's not an adventurous act. It is a question of winning as many people as possible to recognize that there is nothing redeemable about the U.S. government and U.S. imperialism, nothing. And that the African People's Socialist Party is winning Africans. They have organization all throughout the United States, as well as Africans in London, in Sweden, in Paris, France, and in Kenya, and in South Africa, especially near Johannesburg, in Gauteng province, the richest province of South Africa, where African people supposedly are free, but live in greater poverty than during apartheid. So the strategy is for us to go into the white community as African internationalism, as the voice of black power and white face. I think that's a pretty brilliant strategy. And it's pretty powerful because it has a lot of faith in the ability of white people to take a principled stand. And I believe that we are doing that and we can do that. And that many others of us want to do that. So I want to say that white people are in a crisis. We have these things they call the deaths of despair. I don't know about your family, but yeah, my brother OD'd on drugs when he was only 25 years old. I have about 5 members of my family who died of alcoholism in one form or another. It's common. It's part of, there's 88,000 people a year die from something to do with alcoholism in this country, and almost 70,000 people overdosing on drugs, not to mention suicide. Why is this? If we're the greatest civilization on the planet, why are we all committing suicide or medicating ourselves, drinking to oblivion? Why is this happening? It's happening because I believe that we do not want to be the colonizer. Yeah. We do not want to be the enemies of the people on the planet Earth. We do not want to be the state. We do not want to see African children gunned down by this system. We don't want to see that. We don't want to be part of that. We don't want to be the soldiers for U.S. imperialism in Afghanistan and the people of Iran and Iraq and Syria. And look what U.S.-backed Saudi Arabia is doing to the people of Yemen. We don't want to do that. We want to be part of the world. We want to find our humanity. We want to regain it, or find it maybe for the first time ever. We want to be part of this. And we do have a place in this revolution. And it is to go into the white community and to win other people like ourselves and to say, this dirty, filthy system has to go. We don't have to be the enemy of the people on the planet Earth. We can end our self-imposed isolation from everybody else. We don't have to culturally appropriate something. We can do what we're supposed to do inside the belly of the beast, bring as many white people as we can, unleash all the stolen resources and turn it back over, not to an individual, but to the African Revolution, which is building centers of black power here and around the world, that is economic and political, that makes us have a job to surround that with white communities in unity with reparations to African people to be the supply line for the African Revolution. I think that's pretty brilliant. And we are going to have a revolution because this system is hated by the people on the planet Earth and nobody can even live there. And do you think that, that climate change is going to be solved by the white people that create it? No way. There was no problem with the climate when indigenous people had this land, when African people had control of their own land, and oppressed and colonized peoples. They're going to solve the problem. But if we want to be part of a future and building it and contributing to it, then return the stolen resources. Everything we have is stolen. Everything we have is stolen, including the ideas in our heads, the leisure to be able to build technology and all of this kind of thing based on the enslavement of the majority of the people on planet Earth. And I just want to say, when Africa is free, science will be free. Science will be for the people. We will see the flourishing of humankind. There will be no oppression. All white people, from LGBT, trans, gender, people in wheelchairs, old people, young people, you have a place in this movement under the leadership of the African Revolution. You can be a leader. You can organize. You can do this, and we can change the world and be part of something so much bigger than ourselves that gives us the ability, as we said, for the first time in history, to be part of the planet Earth, to be part of humanity and not its enemy. And I think that that is very powerful, and that is the essence of what the question of reparations is. So I salute all of you for coming out, and just end by saying unity through
reparations.